You are Captain James Redholt. It is March 22nd, 1944. Your P-47 Thunderbolt lurches through the sky, trailing a plume of smoke. Below, the German countryside is a blur. Your engine sputters, a carefully orchestrated lie. You've fallen behind the main bomber stream, a lone, wounded sheep for the wolves. But the damage is a phantom, the smoke a stage trick. You are not the victim. You are the bait in the most audacious aerial trap of the Second World War. And the wolves are coming. To understand the genius and desperation behind this moment, we must rewind the clock just a few months to a time when the American aerial campaign against the Third Reich was on the verge of breaking. By early 1944, the United States 8th Air Force was hemorrhaging men and machines over occupied Europe. The vast formations of B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators, designed to be self-defending aerial battleships, were proving fatally vulnerable. The reason was a cold, pragmatic, and devastatingly effective doctrine adopted by the German Luftwaffe. German fighter pilots, flying their nimble Bf-109s and heavily armed Focke-Wulf 190s, were ordered to follow a simple, brutal rule: ignore the American fighter escorts. They were to refuse combat with the deadly P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs circling the main engagement like sharks. Their true targets were the stragglers. Every bombing mission created them. A burst of flak, a lucky shot from a cannon, a simple mechanical failure. Any of these could force a heavy bomber to lose speed and altitude, falling away from the protective formation. For the 10-man crew of such a vessel, this was a death sentence. Alone in a hostile sky, they became the focus of the German wolfpacks. These specialized hunting groups would descend upon the crippled bomber with merciless efficiency, tearing it apart in a matter of minutes. The psychological impact was catastrophic. Bomber crews feared not just the enemy, but the fragility of their own machines. The long flight home from targets like Schweinfurt or Bremen became a gauntlet of anxiety, where the greatest terror was being left behind. For the American High Command, led by Major General William Kepner, it was a tactical nightmare. Their fighter escorts were succeeding in their primary role of defending the main bomber stream, yet bomber losses remained unsustainably high. The Luftwaffe had refused to play by American rules. They had changed the game, turning the vast German sky into a hunting ground where they held every advantage. The problem couldn't be solved with more guns or bigger engines. It was a strategic Gordian knot. The solution, when it came, didn't originate from a West Point strategist or a seasoned combat ace. It came from the mind of a man who had never flown a combat mission, a man whose skills were honed not in a cockpit, but in a studio. Technical Sergeant Daniel Weiss was a former commercial artist. His understanding of warfare was framed not by doctrine, but by perspective, color, and perception. While commanders saw a tactical problem, Weiss saw a visual one. On March 15th, 1944, watching the grim-faced crews return to base, an idea began to form. The Germans were hunting for visual cues of weakness. What if, instead of trying to hide, the Americans gave the Germans exactly what they were looking for? The concept was radical. Reverse camouflage. Don't make a fighter look strong and intimidating. Make it look mortally wounded. Paint a perfectly healthy, fully armed P-47 Thunderbolt to appear as if it's on its last legs, a straggler falling out of formation. It would be an irresistible target, a piece of cheese in a carefully laid trap. Weiss's proposal, presented at RAF Badisham to the battle-hardened leadership of the 359th Fighter Squadron, was met with a wall of incredulous silence, followed by outright skepticism. The very idea seemed to violate every instinct of a fighter pilot. Their P-47 Thunderbolts, nicknamed Jugs, were symbols of American industrial might, tough, powerful, and heavily armed. The notion of intentionally making one look like a broken toy, of painting on weakness, felt like a sacrilege. To the aces in the room, men who lived and breathed aerial combat, it sounded like a suicide mission. They were hunters, not decoys. Yet the grim reality of the daily casualty reports lent a desperate weight to Weiss's words. His champion, Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Dickman, commander of the squadron, saw the kernel of unconventional genius in the plan and pushed for a serious consideration. What followed was not merely a paint job, but a masterclass in psychological stagecraft. Weiss understood that the illusion had to be perfect. From a distance of several hundred yards at speeds exceeding 300 miles per hour, the fake damage had to fool the keen eyes of veteran Luftwaffe pilots. Simple paint wouldn't suffice. Weiss and his small hand-picked team began to engineer a complete deception package. They fabricated lightweight, three-dimensional panels that could be bolted onto the fuselage, shaped and painted to mimic jagged, torn metal and gaping holes from cannon fire. These panels caught the light in a way flat paint never could, creating the illusion of real depth and catastrophic structural failure. The true masterstroke, however, was the smoke. Weiss's team rigged a theatrical smoke generator, controlled by a switch in the cockpit, which fed a harmless, oil-based vapor into the exhaust stream. On command, a pilot could trail a thick, convincing plume of black smoke, the universal signal of a dying engine. This visual lie was then paired with a rigorous training regimen. Weiss created what he called performance checklists. Pilots selected for the decoy role had to unlearn their aggressive instincts and learn to act. They practiced flying with a deliberate, sluggish wobble, mimicking the unstable flight of a bomber with a damaged control surface. They rehearsed slow, drifting descents, appearing to struggle just to maintain altitude. Every movement was choreographed to scream, "Easy kill." The project was nearly strangled in its cradle by bureaucracy and military law. Objections were raised that the tactic constituted perfidy, a violation of the Hague Convention. Faking damage, some argued, was akin to misusing a flag of truce or feigning surrender, an act that eroded the unwritten rules of warfare. But the argument from the field, championed by visionaries like Dickman and the highly respected Colonel Hub Zemke of the 56th Fighter Group, was one of grim necessity. The Luftwaffe's doctrine was not a gentleman's duel. It was a systematic slaughter of their most vulnerable crews. An unconventional response was not just justified. It was essential for survival. The proposal eventually landed on the desk of Major General William Kepner, commander of the entire 8th Fighter Command. Kepner was a pragmatist, tasked with a seemingly impossible mission, protecting the bombers at all costs. He weighed the risks, the potential for international incident, and the sheer audacity of the plan against the ever-growing lists of the dead and missing. He made his decision. The program was approved for a single, highly classified trial. A flight of 4 damaged fighters would serve as bait, with a larger group of hunters flying high above, hidden in the glare of the sun, ready to pounce. The trap was set. Now all they needed were the wolves. That brings us back to Captain James Redholt, throttling his P-47 through the cold German air on March 22, 1944. He was a veteran pilot, a man comfortable with calculated risk. But this was something entirely new. Flying a perfectly sound aircraft as if it were falling apart went against every fiber of his training. The stick felt loose and sloppy in his hands, an intentional act of mistrimming to create the wounded wobble Weiss had prescribed. His thumb hovered over the smoke generator switch, a piece of stage equipment that now felt like the most important weapon on his aircraft. He and the 3 other decoy pilots had detached from the main escort group after the bombers had hit their target near Brunswick. They began their slow, agonizing descent, trailing smoke and deliberately lagging behind, a perfect imitation of crippled stragglers desperate to make it home. High above and miles behind, unseen, the rest of the 359th Fighter Squadron waited. They were the hammer, poised to fall. Redholt and his wingmen were the anvil. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The radio, normally crackling with the chatter of combat, was dead silent. Every dot in the sky, every flicker of movement on the horizon, was a potential threat. Doubt began to creep in. Was the illusion convincing enough? Or did they just look like 4 fools making themselves easy targets for a swift and brutal end? Then the call came. "Bogies! 6 o'clock high!" The hunters had spotted them. A flight of German Bf-109s, vectored in by their ground controllers, was descending on the seemingly helpless American fighters. The German pilots, sensing an easy victory, abandoned their customary caution. They saw exactly what their doctrine had trained them to find: 4 damaged American planes, separated from the herd, their crews surely praying for a miracle that would not come. They dove in, lining up their shots, anticipating the satisfying flash of impact and the bloom of an American fireball. For Captain Redholt, this was the moment of truth. He watched the Messerschmitts grow in his mirrors, closing the distance with predatory speed. His instructions were clear: hold the deception until the last possible second. Let them get close. Let them commit. As the first streams of tracer fire zipped past his canopy, the ambush was sprung. "Tally-ho! Engage!" The call from the hunter element high above echoed in Redholt's ears. Simultaneously, the 4 decoy pilots hit their switches. The smoke generators cut out. They slammed their throttles forward, firewalling the powerful Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engines. The lumbering wounded duck suddenly transformed. The fake damage panels were instantly irrelevant as the Thunderbolts, no longer feigning injury, executed flawless combat breaks, turning hard into their attackers. The German pilots were caught in a state of complete tactical shock. The easy targets they were lining up had vanished, replaced by 4 of the most dangerous fighters in the sky, flying with lethal precision. Their minds, locked into the certainty of a kill, couldn't process the sudden reversal. Before they could react to the decoys in front of them, the true nightmare began. The hunter squadron, diving from altitude with the sun at their backs, slammed into the German formation. It was no longer a fight, it was a slaughter. The Bf-109s, caught between 2 forces, their formation shattered, had no chance. One moment they were predators, the next they were utterly and hopelessly trapped. The first combat trial of the Decoy Squadron was a spectacular, unqualified success. In less than 2 minutes of furious combat, 4 German fighters were sent spiraling towards the earth. the Americans suffered 0 losses. Captain Redholt and his team had not just survived, they had validated one of the most brilliant deceptions of the air war. News of the March 22nd success spread like wildfire through the command structure of the 8th Air Force, though it was shrouded in the highest levels of secrecy. What had been dismissed as an artist's fantasy was now proven deadly battlefield doctrine. The psychological victory was almost as significant as the tactical one. For months, American pilots had felt like they were reacting to the Luftwaffe's strategy, always one step behind. Now, they were the ones setting the terms of the engagement. They were manipulating the enemy's own successful doctrine and turning it into a fatal weakness. The program was immediately expanded. What Daniel Weiss had started with a handful of volunteers and scavenged parts became a highly organized priority operation. Teams of artists and technicians, many with backgrounds in Hollywood, set design, and commercial advertising, were brought in to apply the decoy modifications to more P-47s. The techniques became more sophisticated. They developed new patterns of painted-on flak damage, scorch marks that mimicked engine fires, and even tattered fabric effects for control surfaces on aircraft that had them. The illusion became an art form, each plane a unique masterpiece of fabricated destruction. By April 15, 1944, less than a month after the first trial, the tactic was officially adopted by all fighter groups within the 8th Fighter Command. The skies over Germany became a theater of the absurd. Luftwaffe pilots, once confident in their ability to spot and destroy vulnerable stragglers, were now faced with a paralyzing uncertainty. Was the smoking B-17 a genuine cripple? Or was it the bait for a massive fighter sweep lurking in the sun? Was that lone P-47 truly struggling? Or was it a perfectly healthy killer waiting to spring to life? This hesitation was a weapon in itself. Every moment a German pilot spent assessing a potential target was a moment he wasn't shooting. This newfound doubt gave genuinely damaged bombers a precious few extra seconds or minutes to escape, to make it to the relative safety of the cloud bank, or to limp just a little closer to home. The survival rate of actual stragglers began to climb. The German wolfpack doctrine, once a model of lethal efficiency, began to crumble. The kill ratios told the story. Squadrons employing the decoy tactic saw their success rates skyrocket. Ambushes, like the one on March 22nd, were repeated over and over. In 1 month, a single squadron credited with the tactic ambushed and destroyed over 40 enemy fighters, a staggering number that represented a significant blow to the Luftwaffe's already strained fighter corps. The psychological toll on the German pilots was immense. They were trained to be aggressive, to press the attack. Now their own aggression could lead them into a perfectly orchestrated trap. The trust in what their eyes told them was shattered. This erosion of confidence spread through the Jagdgeschwader, the German fighter wings, creating a sense of paranoia. American air superiority was being won not just by overwhelming numbers and industrial might, but by a clever trick conceived by a man who understood the art of deception better than the art of war. The program, codenamed Operation Shrike, remained one of the best-kept secrets of the war. Its success relied entirely on the element of surprise, on the Germans never fully comprehending the scale or sophistication of the ruse being played upon them. For the American bomber crews, the effect was palpable. Even if they didn't know the cause, they simply knew that the flight home seemed just a little bit safer, that the wolves in the sky seemed a little less certain, a little less deadly. The genius of the decoy strategy lay in its asymmetric nature. The Americans were not trying to outfight the Germans in a traditional sense. They were outthinking them. Warfare is often a contest of material strength. Who has the faster plane, the bigger gun, the thicker armor? Operation Shrike, however, targeted the enemy's mind. It attacked the decision-making process of the opposing pilot, sowing confusion and hesitation at the most critical moment of an engagement. This was psychological warfare in its purest form, waged thousands of feet above the earth. The choice of the P-47 Thunderbolt for this role was instrumental to its success. The Jug was famously durable, a flying tank renowned for its ability to absorb incredible amounts of punishment and still bring its pilot home. When Luftwaffe pilots saw a Thunderbolt trailing smoke and looking battered, it was entirely believable. The aircraft's reputation for toughness made the deception plausible. Had the Americans used a more fragile-looking fighter, the ruse might have been questioned. But a damaged P-47 was a common enough sight that it didn't immediately raise suspicion. It was the perfect canvas for Daniel Weiss's art of war. The pilots who flew these decoy missions were a special breed. It required a unique kind of courage to intentionally make oneself the target, to fly in a manner that invited attack. They had to possess an ironclad faith in their machine, in their hidden escort, and in the plan itself. The transition from passive bait to aggressive hunter had to be instantaneous. One moment they were actors playing the part of a victim. The next, they were elite fighter pilots engaged in a life-or-death struggle. This mental flexibility, the ability to switch roles under extreme pressure, was the hallmark of the decoy aces. While the painted-on damage was the most visible aspect of the deception, the coordinated tactics of the hunter element were just as crucial. The success of the ambush depended on perfect timing and positioning. The hunters had to remain completely unseen, often flying miles away and thousands of feet higher, using the sun's glare, cloud cover, and the limitations of the human eye to their advantage. They became masters of patience, orbiting and waiting for the trap to be sprung. Their discipline was paramount. Attacking too early would reveal the ambush, while attacking too late would mean the decoys would be destroyed. This complex aerial choreography, involving dozens of aircraft spread out over vast sections of the sky, required a level of command, control, and communication that was unprecedented. The entire operation was a testament to the 8th Air Force's ability to innovate under pressure. Faced with a problem that conventional tactics couldn't solve, its leadership embraced a radical idea from an unlikely source. The story of Technical Sergeant Daniel Weiss is a powerful reminder that some of the most effective solutions come from those who see the world differently. He wasn't a warrior in the traditional sense, but his contribution saved countless lives. He looked at a deadly tactical challenge and saw it as a problem of perception. By manipulating what the enemy saw, he changed what the enemy did, and in doing so, he helped alter the course of the air war over Europe. The program remained classified for decades, a hidden chapter in the history of the Second World War. It was finally declassified in 1991, revealing the full story of the artist who went to war and defeated his enemies not with a gun, but with a paintbrush. Operation Shrike stands as a masterstroke of military deception, a powerful illustration of how ingenuity can triumph over entrenched doctrine. It succeeded because it didn't just counter the Luftwaffe's tactic, it exploited it. The German strategy of hunting stragglers was logical, resource-efficient, and brutally effective. The genius of Weiss's plan was that it didn't require the Germans to abandon their strategy, but rather to pursue it with even greater zeal, leading them directly into a meticulously prepared trap. The legacy of the Decoy Squadron extends far beyond the impressive kill-to-loss ratios. Its most profound impact was the restoration of morale. For the bomber crews, the endless missions over Germany had become a grim lottery. The sight of a fellow B-17, engines failing, peeling away from the formation, was a vision of their own potential fate. The decoy tactic, even though its specifics were unknown to them, created a palpable change in the skies. The wolfpacks became less aggressive, more hesitant. That hesitation, born of uncertainty, was a shield for every Allied airman. It meant that a crew battling a failing engine or nursing a wounded crew member had a slightly better chance of survival. It was a small shift, but in a war of attrition, small shifts save lives. The program also highlights the critical importance of adaptation in warfare. The history of military conflict is filled with examples of powerful armies being defeated because they were unable or unwilling to change their methods. The 8th Air Force, facing catastrophic losses, could have simply continued to push forward, accepting the casualties as the cost of war. Instead, its leadership fostered an environment where an unconventional idea from a non-commissioned officer could be heard, tested, and implemented in a matter of weeks. This agility and willingness to embrace innovation from the bottom up was a core strength that ultimately contributed to Allied victory. The story of the painted fighters is ultimately a human one. It is the story of Daniel Weiss, the artist who saw the battlefield as a canvas of perception. It is the story of commanders like Dickman, Zemke, and Kepner, who had the courage to risk their careers on a bizarre and unproven idea. And most of all, it is the story of pilots like Captain James Redholt, who willingly flew into the heart of the danger, trusting their lives to a coat of paint and a puff of theatrical smoke. Their success serves as an enduring lesson that in the complex calculus of war, the most powerful weapon is not always forged from steel, but can be crafted from creativity, audacity, and a profound understanding of the enemy's mind. The hunters had become the hunted, not because of a new weapon, but because of a new way of thinking. And in the lethal skies of 1944, that made all the difference.